I promised you that we were going to record. There we go. We're on recording. And so, yes, for those that are with us for the first time, I just want to say why To Kill a Mockingbird. And we all know the story of Kill a Mockingbird. So our minds mock us continuously. But here at To Kill a Mockingbird, you can pop onto the website if you want to go and have a look at some information. But basically what we're going to cover is we cover personal growth, leadership development, self-awareness, boundaries. That's the one we're going to be looking at tonight, which means we are going to look at self-awareness, which means we are going to look at personal growth. We are going to look at behavior modification. Tonight, don't worry, unless you've got boundary issues like I do with health or weight loss, it will be appropriate for that as well tonight. So we're going to cover everything except, in fact, all these topics we're going to cover tonight, even leadership development, which is quite exciting. Okay, why To Kill a Mockingbird specifically? I don't know, have you ever listened to your inner narrator, that little voice that continually keeps unpacking and telling you verbally in your mind how your life is going and how you're preparing your experiences or how you've been prepared for your experiences? And those little voices should be, and well, I don't know, the normal person like you guys have one little voice. Person like me, I've probably got 3 or 4, 6 little voices going on in my head. And they actually have full conversations while I'm driving the car. And one even sounds like Anthony. So when I have this conversation in the car, I've had this full-on dialogue with Anthony. And I get home and expect him to know exactly what went down. All right, so these little voices, choir of voices, play around, and they give us a play of our day. Unfortunately, our mind doesn't know truth from reality. So what could happen is that your little voice that's describing, explaining or commenting situations could actually be telling you lies, because your little voice wants to protect you. Your mind will always protect you. So sometimes these conversations, we even end up having outcomes with them, and we might not necessarily understand that that outcome might not be the truth. So that is why we're challenging ourselves and pushing ourselves to the next level, and always unpacking what we're thinking, where we're going, so that for those of you who are believers, the Bible says we grow from glory to glory, which means we need to go better to better every day. And I mean, if I was the person today that I was when I first met Anthony, we wouldn't actually be together. So really, honestly, thank goodness, as Fernanda said, Anthony hardly ever gets cross, and I have to agree with you. He really, really, really doesn't. He's probably the most patient human being, and hence we are still married. Okay, because of his patience. So this evening's topic, To Kill a Mockingbird, we are going to be looking at boundaries. Now, what are boundaries? Most of us understand what boundaries are. We understand that it's a border, a fence, or a wall, okay, specifically to separate 2 properties. And that's what we've got to really remember here, that a boundary is put in place to separate properties. It also shows us who's responsible for what property, okay? So in other words, we know trespassers will be prosecuted, that kind of thing, all right? So we definitely understand that properties are placed in place for us to be responsible. Now, we have got physical boundaries. Your physical boundaries can be your fence, your border, but it also can refer to your body, your privacy, and your personal space. And that's important for us to remember. So it's not just a fence that's been placed to keep the buck out or to keep whatever out. And we know the whole of South Africa is living behind fences at the moment. But it's important for us to know that physical boundaries are there. The next type of boundary, which we overlook often, is our emotional boundaries, okay? In other words, we need to understand and ask ourselves the question, am I in touch with my feelings, okay? Do I notice when I feel guilty or feel ashamed or feel upset or feel undervalued? Because if any of those feelings are happening, it means that there's been a boundary that has been violated, okay? So what we need to understand is that boundaries, let me just admit this person quickly to the, all right. So boundaries might be needed when you notice that these feelings are coming up, all right. Also, if you're feeling happy, joyful, excited, all those are also feelings. Now, when we're looking at emotional, sometimes we might emotionally destroy someone else's feelings. Okay, so we need to be aware of this all the time. Okay, the next one is also sexual boundaries. Sexual boundaries, that is your expectation, your physical intimacy within relationships. A boundary we also overlook quite often is, in actual fact, the intellectual boundary. Now, intellectual boundary means showing respect for different points of views and ideas. And can you, especially if you identify, let's say, for example, an emotional boundary, which is a feeling that could get hurt, that feeling, if you're feeling hurt, naturally would now cause disrespect towards someone else, okay? Different points of views and that kind of thing. So how we interact with people, we need to understand, are you a boundary violator, or are you a boundary victim, or are you just, or do you have healthy boundaries in place? So those are the three. We either boundary violators, we either boundary victims, or we can have healthy boundaries. And so tonight's one is to have a look at and challenge us into our thinking. I'm going to bring up some scenarios and have a look at various different things on where have I got boundaries? And if I don't have boundaries, how can I place? And we'll end off by saying, this is how you implement healthy boundaries. And when Anthony and I, before we got to know the Lord, my name was actually called Super Bitch. That was my nickname in the corporate environment. And Anthony's was Hitler. So Super Bitch and Hitler actually got married. All right. So, and now you can see why when we came to know the Lord, we had obviously had 30 years of habitual behavior that we now had to change. And so when we started trying to change the habitual behavior, then we caused a lot of pain by setting in boundaries, because there were certain things that I had to say, I'm a boundary violator and I'm violating, and then Anthony would be the victim, and vice versa. So when we learned about boundaries, and we learned about boundaries way back in 1998, I think it was, way back then, and how we've had to learn to implement boundaries. Now, another type of boundary is financial boundaries. In other words, do you know your financial goals? Do you understand when do you have two separate accounts? What is the boundaries with regards to those separate accounts? For example, how much are you allowed to spend if you have a joint account? How much are you allowed to spend without asking the other person? So Anthony and I have got a limit, and we said, I tend to be a boundary violator where that's concerned quite often. And then he becomes the victim. So for example, I can go and spend on, not every single day, but once a month, I can spend up to R1,000 without picking up the phone and saying, hey, my love, we need this, this, and this, and I'm going to spend R1,000. So, but anything over R1,000, it's only respectful, which goes back to the emotional boundary, and it goes back to the intellectual boundary, where it actually says, hold on a second, let's discuss how we spend this money. Okay, once you've discussed it, yes, Anthony.
But that's not, for instance, you're standing in a queue and you bought groceries and it's more than $1,000.
Yes, it's one item.
Not normal shopping. It's over and above items.
It's a nice pair of shoes. Then I have to ask him if they're R1,500 a pair. Gosh, I would never spend that on shoes. Well, maybe in 5, 6, 20 years from now, I might, because that's the price of shoes. But okay, so those are your type of boundaries that we need to be aware of. So the next question we need to ask ourselves is, going further with what are boundaries, we now need to ask ourselves the question is, what are, the last one there is defines who, boundaries, my last one there is defines who we are and who we are not. So that's another thing. So after financial boundaries at the bottom there, you've got boundaries define who I am and who I am not. Okay, so that's also important for us to realize this. So that's a boundary, and that often we mess up for ourselves. So what's the definition? So we said, what are the types of boundaries we've got, but what is the definition of boundaries? Okay. So definition of boundaries is very simple. The definition is, we need to understand that boundaries were created by God. That's the most important thing for us to realize, is that God actually created boundaries. Right at the very beginning of time, he created boundaries. And it is in the Bible actually says that you've got God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So that's your boundaries. It's 3 different people, but and with their different functions. Boundaries, the definition defines who I am and why I am the person that I am. It tells me what my responsibilities are and what your responsibilities are. It reveals where each of us end and begin. So for example, when we look at physical boundaries, your skin is actually a boundary, because if we didn't have a skin around us, well, we'd all be intertwined in our guts, etc. Sorry about that. Okay, but it does it. Where I begin and where you begin. Boundaries will give us purpose. Boundaries allow freedom of choice. Believe it or not, people think that boundaries bind you, but it actually gives you freedom of choice. Like, for example, the financial boundary, I can work within a thousand rand without getting into trouble, without suffering any consequences. Okay. Boundaries protect us, and it is in that sense we have our fence around our properties. We need to have fences around our emotions. We need to have fences around who we are and what we're prepared to accept. It also increases your love for others, because when we come to a place of understanding who you are, what you stand for, who I am and what I stand for, what I'm prepared to accept, what I'm not prepared to accept, this increases your love for others. Okay. Boundaries can also save your life. For example, going back to physical boundaries, many years ago, my ex-husband, he tried to kill me and my children. So in order to save our lives, I had to set a boundary. And the boundary was, if you continued this kind of behavior, we are going to get divorced. And he continued that kind of behavior, hence we got divorced. So he had to suffer the consequences, but it saved my life and it saved my children's lives. Otherwise, we would probably be dead today. So it's important for us to realize how boundaries can save your life. Those are very serious situations. Okay, so those are your definitions of where boundaries come from, why we need to look at a boundary, and how valuable boundaries actually are. Now, most of us don't realize that we are boundary violators. And it is important. I would really suggest you, if you haven't looked at my video on my YouTube channel, there's one on journaling. It is how the best way to do projection journaling as well as reflection journaling. And I would suggest over the next couple of weeks, don't rush this process, but have a look at see where you actually have boundary problems, either with somebody else and you're the victim, or you're with your children could actually be a boundary violator. In other words, you don't accept other people's boundaries. So how do I know that I have a boundary problem? All right. So very simple. When my life is out of control. Okay. So if my life is out of control, then I have a boundary problem. Okay. If I'm trying harder to try and prove a point to someone and it's not working, that means there's a boundary problem there. Now, it could be that you're becoming the victim and like a people pleaser, for example. You keep trying to do this and you keep trying to do this, and therefore you become the boundary victim because somebody's trying to be a boundary violator and they're not accepting your no, for example, or accepting you for who you are. Being nice out of fear. So, for example, you're fearful of someone's reaction towards you if you actually had to say, no, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not going to accept that, because they would overreact, they would shout, they would scream, they might even give you the silent treatment. So you rather just be nice out of fear. Means that with that particular person, invariably this could be a parent-child relationship. It also can be a boss child, especially if you've got a dictatorial boss. You will be scared to actually say to them, look, I'm terribly sorry, I can't do that for you today, or whatever it is. You'll be scared to set a boundary on your time for fear of losing your job. So that would be you're being nice out of fear. Taking responsibility for others. We'll go a little bit more into that later, but that's a really big boundary problem if you take responsibility for others. Okay. If you keep being taken advantage of, allowing people to take advantage of you, in other words, you say yes to everything and you overcommit, means you have a boundary problem. If you feel disrespected, you have a boundary problem. If you have any form of physical or emotional pain towards an individual, it means you have a boundary problem. All right, so there's a lot. I'm pretty sure if you're like me, you've identified a few areas where you possibly have a boundary problem. All right, so I hope we're going to discuss that later. and see how we can actually overcome these boundary problems. I don't expect you to share names and personal situations, but it is important for us to realize, and how important it is for us to realize, especially if we have young children, how can we raise them to have healthy boundaries? Okay. So what are the functions of boundaries? Okay, very simple. Functions of boundaries are: one, they keep the good in and the bad out. In other words, the Bible says, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So therefore, you only should be putting good in and not letting bad destroy you. The function of a boundary is to set off an alarm for us when something is wrong. So at any time when I'm feeling guilty, shameful, disrespected, angry, upset, all those emotions are telling me that I'm violating and allowing one of my personal boundaries to be violated. A very good example of a good boundary is actually your values, which I'll go into a little bit more later, so I won't go into that now, but it is your values that can be violated, and we don't realize that that's actually what's helping us there. They help us to detach. Boundaries, the function, they help us to detach. In other words, I don't get emotionally involved in a situation. I can look at a situation without any emotions attached to it. So I can actually look at it from a very what's the word I want? A very something perspective, a balanced perspective. Okay, and they protect our freedom. Sorry, not our freedom, our freedom. All right, they protect our freedom, and I've spoken about that just now. Right. So what is inside of my boundary? Okay, what's inside my boundaries? So inside my boundaries, what should be healthy in my boundaries? In other words, I'm going to now grow to be this healthy human being, and I need to, and in fact, I think I've learned too well to set boundaries. I set boundaries very quickly. But initially I used to be a very big people pleaser for fear. And so I became a boundary victim. Especially to strong males, and so now I had to learn how to set my boundaries, and I actually sometimes I'm a little bit harsh on setting my boundaries. Let me just let someone in. Okay, so first of all, let's look at my feelings that are inside my boundaries. The feeling that's inside my boundary would be, my feelings are the barometer of the soul. It tells us how we're doing. So if we're angry or happy or sad, and this is why it's so important to teach children, especially young kids, how to work out what is the feeling, because even young men, I'm sorry to generalize now, but it also is some women, but generally speaking, I take my son, for example. He gets into a relationship, he gets married. Now he can't express his feelings because I didn't give him enough words to actually manage what one feeling meant. So he would be angry, but is it really anger? Was it not frustration more than anger? So it's the barometer of our soul, and it helps us to identify. And that's why it's so important for people, especially the young generation, to grow up understanding how we can actually learn the different words for our different feelings. And now we need to ask ourselves the question: do I ignore those feelings, or do I allow them to dictate? Because if I either ignore them or allow those feelings to dictate, I'm going to violate boundaries, either my own boundaries or someone else's boundaries. I need to learn how to process those boundaries. So that's inside my boundaries, and that's just starting the ball off. Okay, there's a lot of these, and now we're going to probably wish Michelle hadn't even started this session today. Okay, what's also inside my boundaries that I need to look after, what I'm responsible for, okay, I'm only responsible for myself and these areas. That's my attitudes and my beliefs. So my attitude is my orientation towards something. In other words, how I act and react towards something. So only I am responsible for that. No one can make me angry. No one can make me sad. I am responsible for my reaction towards those things. And they're based off my beliefs. So my belief is anything that I accept to be true. Now, your belief and my belief on a certain topic could be completely polar opposite to each other. And so we could be like completely back to back and looking at 180 degrees on the other side. But my belief system and what I believe in is my reality. Okay, so if my belief is wrong, how do I now learn to actually get my belief And how do I learn to change it? And only I can change it. No one can change it for me. They can share their perspective, but it doesn't necessarily mean I accept that perspective and what's going on. So when we understand our attitudes and our beliefs, we need to also ask ourselves, what is causing me to make poor choices? Yes, we make good choices as well, but we don't need to process good choices, because we need to process poor choices. And the reason being is because we suffer bigger consequences to poor choices. We are also going to suffer consequences for our good choices, okay? Because somebody else might not like our good choices, and we'll suffer the consequence of making that decision, even if they don't like that. So can you understand now how important it is, just from this? I mean, we haven't even got to, I've got another at least 8 inside our boundaries that we need to look at. How important it is for you and I to understand how valuable boundaries actually are, and how often we end up being a boundary violator, how often we end up being a boundary victim, and how seldom we end up having healthy boundaries. Okay. And that goes for all of us. All right. What else is hey. What else is inside of my boundaries? That is my behaviors. Okay. In other words, all my behaviors have consequences. I've spoken about good choices, bad choices. So I'm responsible for my behavior. Okay. To rescue or to be rescued from natural consequences to behavior renders you powerless. So if you as a mum, which I used to always do to my son, I used to rescue him all the time. In other words, if here's a good example. When I learned about boundaries, and I learned after powerless, when you rescue someone, you in fact do not love them. That was my biggest, I think I cried for about a week, because I was continuously, and the first time I learned about boundaries was when my son was actually in matric. So I literally had rescued this child his entire life, and therefore actually was setting him up for failure, to not be able to be a person who would be a young man going into the world as a healthy person who could make decisions without having mom rescue him. So in matric, they had their year, and he became deputy head boy, and they all went for a camping trip down the south coast. We lived in KwaZulu-Natal, and they were all excited. Now, whenever my son went on a camp, I would take the list and I would pack his socks and his shoes and his cup and his knives and forks and everything. With the girls, I would give them the list and they went and did it. So you see how I rescued him. So this time I said to him, here's the list, you've got to pack it yourself. Oh my goodness, he couldn't even find the knives and forks in the kitchen. But anyway, he eventually packed. He packed up everything. He moaned and groaned like absolute crazy for hours while he had to do it, and told me that I didn't love him, and why was I forcing him to do all of this and that and the next thing. Next minute, the truck arrives, or the bus arrives to collect him. He's so excited. He jumps into the back of the bus and off he goes, flying off. And now he's so glad he can get rid of his mother, who hasn't helped him pack a darn thing. And off he goes. So I go to the room, because of course my son left his bedroom door open, and his bedroom door was actually a converted garage, because he wanted his independence. And of course I had to go and close the door. I go to close the door because that's what mom does all the time. She rescues him. And guess what, ladies? His entire sleeping bag, everything he's packed, his trunk, his you name it, was lying there. He jumped on the bus, because who used to put it on the bus for him before? His mother. I ran upstairs to Anthony and said, come on, let's get in the car. Let's load all of this. Let's chase the bus. And they've only like 10 minutes ahead. We can go and catch him. And he turned around and said to me, no, absolutely not. I said, what? Are you crazy? We got to go. He said, no, he must learn the lesson, the consequence of leaving his things behind. Well, that weekend happened to be the rainiest weekend in KwaZulu-Natal. My son had no tent, no food, nothing, but he slept in a tree. So guys, that was the biggest lesson my son learned. He became a man overnight. Had I rescued him, I would have set him up for failure. So that was my big lesson. Okay, what's inside your boundaries is choices as well. Take responsibility for your choices, good and bad. He had to take responsibility for leaving his goods behind. That was a bad thing, but he learned very quickly. All right. Also, boundary problem when you disown your choices and lay the responsibility on someone else or blame them. Guys, we cannot do that. We need to take if you point a finger and blame, especially as a leader, you always take responsibility for what has happened in your situations. So if a person that you are mentoring or is in the workplace makes a mistake, if you go into a board meeting and say, oh no, I can't take responsibility for that because Anthony did it, that's not good leadership. Okay, so there are times where you protect, but then you don't allow the person, you're still going to deal with the person for the decisions that they made. So there is a fine line here that you're not taking responsibility, but you're not blaming someone. Okay, so please, there's a big difference between the two, but don't blame other people for your mistakes. All right. Are you all with me still? Hey, it's a lot of information. Let me just stop share here quickly. I hope you're all with us still. Okay, do you see how important boundaries are and how important it is for us to understand that there is just more to it? So I'm just going to give you a brief overview and land the plane by sharing with how you can actually deal with boundaries, and then we'll put it into some other practical examples. You will get the recording and the PowerPoint because you really need to spend some time over the next month or so looking at this. In fact, it's a lifetime lessons that we need to be going through all the time. Okay, so you're all with me still. It's an overload of info, but hey, it is what boundaries is. Awesome, guys. Great, let's continue. All right, so what more is in my boundaries? Okay, this is where I said our values earlier on. What we value, love, and assign importance to. Now, that's not just, for example, your house, your car, that kind of thing, but values as well. So one of my core values is loyalty. Oh my gosh, if anyone is disloyal to me, I actually cut them out. I can't deal with it. But whereas one of Anthony's core values is integrity. You know what, if you have an disintegrous spirit and you disintegrous towards me, I'm over it. Is integrity a good value for me? Absolutely. But it doesn't cut my core. So it's very important for us to identify what our top 5 core values are, because if somebody else violates a value, you will find anger will come up. You will find that irritation will come up. So not are you always angry or upset with somebody for what they've done. They might have just violated a value. So when you're processing for yourself and you're upset with somebody, angry with somebody, or whatever it might be, always go back to your core values first. Make that your starting point. Because if they violated your value of loyalty, it's easy to process the problem, as opposed to wanting people to sit down and have a big conversation with you. So values is very important. Maybe one of the days we'll go deeper into values. Another thing is your limits. Okay, learn to set limits. All right. Like for example, the speed limit is a value of the country. So please don't break the speed limit. Talents. Okay, take responsibility for your talents. All right. Unless you drive an XS BMW like me, it doesn't understand the speed limits. Okay. I just thought I'd throw that one in for George. Okay. Take responsibility for the talents that you've been given and use them correctly and appropriately. All right. So your talents are, because most of us have talents. For example, you might have a talent to play piano, but you've got a parent who hates playing piano. They will tell you and never allow you to play the piano. Now you leave home and you owe it to yourself because God has given you that talent to go and play the piano. Okay, just using it as a simple example. Okay, well, your thoughts, please own your thoughts. That's also inside of your boundaries. You've got to own your thoughts because your thoughts become your actions. Okay, your desires. Actively seek your dreams, your wants, and your goals. There are people out there that will stop you and tell you you're foolish to follow those dreams and goals. So please understand that you mustn't allow boundary violators to steal your dreams from you. Okay. In other words, don't let others derail you. And then, of course, love is also a boundary. Learn to give appropriate love and learn to receive appropriate love. The bottom line with love is don't sell your soul. Okay, for example, somebody could be in an abusive relationship, all right? And you stay in the relationship. And a perfect example I learned today was I read an article that was pasted on my Facebook page, and it was all about the hope experiment. And the hope experiment, it was very simply, not simply, but what they did is they put in a cylinder of water, they filled the water up just enough so a rat or a mouse couldn't touch the bottom of the water, so that it had to keep paddling. They found that the average mouse gave up after 15 minutes. So when they realized that a few mice had drowned, just before the 15 minutes, what they did was they took the rat out the water. They took him out, they dried him, they fed him, they nurtured him, they pampered him. Then they put the rat back into the water a couple of hours later to continue with the experiment. Who would like to guess? If you read the article, please don't put the answer in, okay? But who would like to, if you haven't heard of the answer, how long do you think the rat paddled for the second time after it was taken out the water, given food and pampered and all the rest of it? How long do you think he continued to paddle in the water? If you've read it, don't answer. If you know the right answer, less time, Fernando, good one. Anybody else want to share with us? Doc knows the answer, so he can't say anything. George, Tessa, Sonia, Elna, nobody want to guess? All right, Mariki, nobody guessing here. Okay. The second time the mouse was placed into the water, he paddled for 60 hours, 60 hours. Okay, the hope experiment. For somebody who's a boundary victim and they're selling their soul for love, the reason why they stay in abusive relationships is exactly the same thing. That one moment of love that they got from that partner, that one, they live off that one moment. After that, they could be put into hell, okay? But they keep going because they live for that one moment. Like that, the mouse paddled for 60 hours, or the mice that were tested for 60 hours, because they knew, they were holding on to the hope that someone would rescue them. Now that's the hope experiments. That's what happens to you, to human beings as well. We live off that desire to re-experience. Drug addicts, this is why they become exactly. This is why they become drug addicts, because they look for that one moment of that up that they get, that euphoria that they actually experience. So it's quite interesting that love, a lot of people live in relationships because they just want that one more moment. Okay, so there we go. So that's quite an interesting thing I learned today. Okay, let's continue to just overload your brains because we can. Okay, boundaries. All right, let's see what else in the chat. Yeah, I totally agree. Ouch. Okay, what are healthy boundaries? Let's have a look at what healthy boundaries are. Okay, healthy boundaries are set to make sure mentally and emotionally you are stable. So if you at any point in time that you're feeling emotionally stable, feeling strong, you know that all the boundaries around you are in a healthy state. Okay. Healthy boundaries can serve to establish your identity, because now you know what you stand for, you now know what you're not prepared to accept, and you know when to say no, you know when to say yes. So it creates and establishes a strong identity. It can help define your own individuality. Okay, so it helps you define your individuality. Boundaries helps indicate what you will and will not hold yourselves responsible for. Okay, so that's what healthy boundaries do. And it's a difficult place for all of us to get to, because remember, now we have boundaries set for different people. We are boundary violators and different people. We have healthy boundaries and different people. We are boundary victims. Okay, so it all depends. And this is why we process. This is why we spend time. And I would say just process it with the relationships that are important to you. All right. Poor boundaries, very simple, lead to resentment, anger, and burnout. So you're continuously tired, exhausted, because you've got to people please 24/7, 365. So those are your poor boundaries. So what we're going to do now is let's have a look at these good boundaries again. Good boundaries will give you good mental health, good emotional health, developed autonomy, developed identity, avoid burnout, and influence others' behavior as well as your own. So those are really the reasons why and the advantages of having healthy boundaries. Okay, it's going to give you good mental health as well as emotional health. Okay, and gives you a strong identity. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to end off now with how do we set personal boundaries, because most people get this wrong. Okay, most people think I'm going to set a boundary, I just have to say no. It's not saying no, it's how you say no to things. All right, that's the important thing. So first of all, what one needs to do, and this is probably the most important part of all of tonight, is you need to define and identify what is the boundary that needs to be set. So sometimes you might have to sit and discuss this with somebody to get a different perspective of, do I need to set a boundary here or don't I need to set a boundary? So for example, and I remember Shoal used this example the other day, and it made me think about my children when he actually said it. And he actually used the example that when he had, and I stand to be corrected, but when he was in financial trouble and he went to his dad to ask his dad for financial help, his dad turned around to him and said to him, no, but I can teach you how to go and make money, or how to go and get a job, or how to go, I can teach you a skill to go and earn income. But for me to give you income is not going to help you at all. In actual fact, it's going to hinder you, because the next time you're in trouble, because if I don't teach you the skill, which means I'm responsible for teaching you the skill, I'm not responsible to you. I'm not responsible for you. I'm responsible to you. So therefore, I'm responsible to teach you how to go and make money. I'm not responsible for giving you money. So it's a very big, it was quite a thing. And I had to reassess myself with my own children. And also, and I remember my dad did the same thing to myself at one stage. And he said, no, I'm terribly sorry, I can't lend you XXX. But if you go and do this, this, and this, you can go and earn it. And that was something. So you need to define what the boundary is, because if you're bailing your children out all the time financially, especially if they're adults, it actually means you don't love them. It actually means you're rendering them powerless. And that was a very big moment for me. So now I'm on a journey to without imposing on my children, to try and gently find out, so what are your financial investments? How are you doing? What are you doing? Because if I fork out the money and they just abuse that system, and they're always going to come to me. And so that was a big thing. I'm rendering them powerless, because what happens if I die? And we had the same thing with our domestic. When we first moved here to Johannesburg in 2006, every single winter, because my domestic had 8 orphans that she was looking after, and plus her children. So I had compassion upon her. So what I did is every summer I bought them all clothes, and every winter we bought them all clothes. Then I realized, hold on a second, what happens if I die? These kids are going to end up with nothing. So I then went to her house, and we sat there, and I looked at her home, Anthony and we had a look around and said, what has she got that she can turn into a business? And she had a broken down chicken hook that we helped to, get some more money to build the chicken hook. So in other words, she sold some products and she made her chicken hook. She put more chickens in and she sold eggs. So that gave her income. Then after that, we taught her not to spend all the money, but to now save some money because she had a big enough property to build 1-bedroom units on. And she built 3 1-bedroom units, which she rented out. And she started that off by chickens. Now she looks after her own children and all the rest of it. But we were making her powerless because we were just buying it for her. So define that boundary. It's so important. Once you've done that, the next step is to communicate. Say what you need. In other words, I need to sit Ellie down and say, Ellie, I'm very sorry and apologize that I'm buying clothing for you, because if I disappear or we move back to Durban or whatever it might be, I can't continue. So these are the reasons why I no longer can buy the boundary. So it's not just, no, I'm not buying clothing anymore. I need to communicate. And when communicating, stay simple, okay? You don't have to over-explain that you're not accepting this behavior anymore, or but it's just say, hey guys, this is our situation, and keep it simple. Because sometimes we think we have to over-explain something because we're feeling guilty to put the boundary. And if you're feeling guilty to set a boundary, it means that there's a boundary problem. So it's very important for us to make sure that we define exactly before we communicate to somebody, because if we don't do that, we're going to set a boundary from a place of anger, a place of frustration, a place of annoyance. And you can't. You need to come to peace. So when you're defining that boundary, and before you communicate it, discuss it with people so that when you're ready, you've written it down, you know exactly where you stand, you know the plan forward, and expect the person who you're saying, look, I'm terribly sorry, we can't do this anymore. Expect them to be angry with you, because you've allowed the boundary to be violated for so long that it's a natural response. And that's when I said it was where Anthony and I first had our first argument, is because I set a boundary on something that was very simple, but because we had lived with it for so long, it was like, hold on a second, you don't love me anymore. No, it's not that. It's because I love you that we need to set that boundary in place. And it was a very simple boundary. It wasn't a big boundary. It was just something that it just meant he had to do it himself. Okay. And don't worry, and vice versa. But the most important step here, all right, that we tend to forget, please write this down in bold letters and highlight it. We need to set the consequences of why you're setting the boundary. Okay. So say why it's important. So setting a boundary is very important, but you need to say, look, if you're going to continue being angry with me about this, then I'm not going to invite you over anymore. Okay. So they understand that you're not going to accept bad behavior. Because when you set a boundary on someone and you're doing it from the right place, okay, and you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. When you set the consequence, that's the part you need to stick to. So let me go back to lending my son money. So Pete, look, I'm terribly sorry. I cannot lend you this money, but if you go and bake muffins and sell the muffins, and you sell them at X rands a round of muffins or whatever it is, you can, over a period of time, or make furniture, or whatever it is that he can do to make money, save that money. Or he's actually in the electronical field. So if you're going to make some, what are those things, not DB boards that he used to make, whatever those things are. But anyway, he used to make these electronical boards, I don't know what they were called, but anyway, those things, and he would sell them. And I said, then your profit is X amount, and if you need 10,000 Rand from me, you need to go and make 30 or 40 of these in order to get them. Now I'm prepared to lend you the money to set up the first one so that you can start selling them. Okay, then you've got to pay me back. Now, Peter, if you don't do this, then your family is going to suffer. Or if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. But please don't ask me for money anymore, because I'm always going to give you a solution. I'm not going to lend you money anymore. So if you decide to put the boundary in place, you need to, very important, set up the consequences if a person continues to violate it. Let's go into an abusive relationship, for example. Let's say, for example, the wife loses her temper with the children. She shouts at them all the time. She comes home from work, she's tired, she's shouting at the children. That's an abusive relationship, mother to children. So the father could put in a boundary by saying, look, Mush, okay, but do it when it's a good time. So you sit down and you say, he's thought it through, he's sought counsel on this, and now he's going to communicate. So he takes her for a cup of coffee and he sits down and he says, Mush, look, I know you're tired and exhausted when you get home, but I'm now going to say that the next time you shout and scream at the children like that because you're upset and because you're frustrated, the children and I are going to get in the car and go for a drive. We're not going to accept that behavior anymore. And I will get cross. Trust me. Who the hell do you think you are? You can't do that. You don't understand my work life. And Anthony must just sit quietly and say, I agree with you. I hear you. But we're not going to accept, the children and I are not accepting that behavior anymore at home. So you make the decision, Michelle. If you want us at home when you come home from work, then don't shout and scream. Send yourself to the room. Do what you need to do to calm down before you come and face the family. Okay. Now, I can't get agreement. And Anthony would say, look, I know I can't get agreement on this with you now. I know that because you're not going to agree with me. However, what I am going to say to you, starting tomorrow, if you shout and scream at the children the way you are, we will get in the car and we're going home. We're going for a drive. Please understand. Do you understand what I've just said to you? I'm sorry to ask you if you understand because I'm pretty sure you do. I will be flipping angry. I will probably whip my hut. Okay, I'm going to go and throw my toys around. I'm going to storm out of the restaurant. I am. And then I'm going to get home and I'm going to whip my nonsense. Okay, but if Anthony chooses or the husband chooses to set that boundary, the moment I shout at one of the kids from frustration, he's going to say, guys, come on. We've agreed that if mom is going to carry on like this, we're all going for a drive. Come on, let's get in the car. And he has to do it. Because the more I understand that the rest of my family will not accept my abusive behavior, the quicker my growth is. The quicker I become a nicer person, the quicker I learn to deal with my emotions, as opposed to allowing me to continue with that behavior. Because if I do, my children are not going to love me. My husband's more than likely going to divorce me, and I'm going to be an old spinster sitting on the side of the road by myself. Okay, right. That's the end of the session. I hope you learned something. I would love to hear your inputs. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And it's your job whether you want to set a boundary or not, but just do some work. What was a good, let's start with what was something new or like something that went, oh my gosh, out of the session tonight. Type it in or unmute yourself and share with us. Please, Elna, and I unfortunately don't know who 234419120 is. Mariki, Marina, Simone, thank you for joining us. We'd love you to just type in something new that you learned or unmute yourself and say something. Go for it. Who's starting? Okay, we'll start with Doc Ant.
Well, I think the first aha was that if you don't set boundaries, you don't love the person. That was the harshest thing to learn. That if you do love the person, you will set boundaries, because when you don't, you actually are acting out and your behavior says, I don't love you. That causes a paradigm shift in terms of the desire to want to actually succeed in setting healthy boundaries. But as you heard tonight, the key was how.
Absolutely. And how important it is to set the boundary. So thank you for sharing that. I agree, Fernanda, that is why life is madness and why we never know from one day to the next day and from one person to the next person what our relationships are. And it's a lifelong journey. This is just introduction session to boundaries, and now it's the processing of boundaries after that. There's a really, really good book I highly recommend you go and get. And it's called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Okay, go and get it, read it. So I would definitely suggest you go and do that. Just get the ordinary one. Then later on, if you've got young kids, There is boundaries in children, boundaries in your spouse, boundaries in workplace, boundaries, and there's a lot of places. Boundaries must be met. 100% Fernando, once you set that boundary, you must keep the boundary. Yes, George.
Michelle, what I would like to maybe just add or ask or say or whatever is that in this relationship, you've gotta also learn what the other person's values is, because if you've got a value, let's say, or whatever, it doesn't matter what value it is. If you've got a value and you want that to be respected, you also have to know what the other person's values is, because you have to respect that values as well.
100%.
And the same and I think coming out of a military background, out of leadership positions, where you work with a lot of people, you should learn. Well, we had to learn what the other people, how these other people that you are working with, what their values is, and how you have to handle these people. Because if you only want them to respect your values, you're not going to be a good leader in that line, because if they see that you're not respecting their values or whatever the case may be, you will not get ahead in what you are trying to do. If you get I don't know exactly how to put myself out in English, but yeah.
No, you put it out perfectly. You put it out 100% perfectly.
It's just that you have to know what the other person's value, even in the marriage as well. Yeah. But I mean, I'm not talking about a marriage. I'm just talking about other people as well, you know. So especially in the leadership, a lot of us is in leadership roles in a business or whatever the case may be. You've got co-workers, you've got people working for you. So you got to know what those people's values is as well, because if you don't respect that, they will not respect your values.
100%, George. I couldn't agree with you more.
Something that I picked up that we should do that as well.
I agree 100%. So, for example, anybody that you're working closely with, you should know what their core values are, 100%, because then you know if you're violating it or causes tension in the relationships. So yes, that comment was actually from Isabel. So thanks. Boundaries must be meant, 100%. Elna, thank you. Boundaries is loving yourself and the people around you. So true. It is so true. And how often we forget, you know, that self-love, and, you know, we're so busy trying to give love to everybody else, we forget the self-love and how important it is us. And then great teaching, food for thought, a great lesson on how to set boundaries in a loving, kind way without vet op die vuur. What? Vet op die vuur te gooi. So in other words, that's
it's oil on the fire.
Oil on the fire. That was my Afrikaans for you. I did that for you. Awesome. I love it. Sonia, also very interesting. My problem is I can be pushed to my limits because of I'm a people pleaser. But once someone steps over that boundary in a serious way, there's no turning back for them. People walked over me my whole life until I started to set boundaries. Sonia, so true. And well done for setting those boundaries. And yes, when you set a boundary, it's all about setting the boundary in love. Because if you set a boundary in love, you understand and respect, as George was saying, their core values. You communicate it in love. It's easy to set the consequences, and then it's easy to keep the boundary. So when I first started setting boundaries, I had a journal or a book that I set boundaries in, especially when I started setting them with my children and setting them with me, myself, I'm a boundary violator. For example, I can set a boundary to go on a diet, for example, and then it doesn't work out, or I get upset, and then I say, oh, well, I can have a glass of wine because I'm upset, and that's violating my own boundary. Okay. So I journaled it and I wrote down so that I could remember to keep the boundaries that I was setting, and reason why I was setting them. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Willie, you want to say something? You're good?
Yes, what I realized, Michelle, is all of us have something that a boundary that we want to change or get better. So mine is time.
Okay.
To be on time and to keep the time limit.
Oh,
And
wow.
what I realized is if you get respect from your friends that know you and you change, and I like to keep on changing and get better. If they realize you have set and changed your boundaries and you got better with that, then you get a wow from your friends, and then you earn respect from them.
So true. So true. So true. And you know, my dad, I set a boundary on my dad once. Anthony and I had to set the boundary. My dad is the biggest, he's passed away now, was the biggest boundary violator on planet Earth. If it didn't go his way, he literally walked over you. Do you know that gentleman did not speak to me for 6 months? He even went to his mother and told his mother he didn't like me because I set a boundary with him. Okay. So yeah, so some people will totally resist the boundaries. He said, that child of mine, I disown her. I don't like her. She's a terrible person, because I had to set a boundary with him. All right. And that, which was a good thing. Okay, awesome, guys. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything? Thank you for sharing. I know you've got a lot of info. So did you all make sure that I've got your email addresses before we leave? Let's just see. If you want the PowerPoint, either chat to the person who referred you to make sure that I'm going to send you the PowerPoint and the recording, all right, to make sure that you can go through it, because I really would suggest, as Vili quite rightly said, now we all have something somewhere and we don't know where to start. And invariably it's because we need to set a boundary. Now, please, like I've said, a boundary setting is not saying no to people just because you can say no, all right? It is about how you say the no. The no needs to be defined by you, needs to be communicated in love. It needs to stay simple, and you have to share the consequence if they violate that boundary. All right, that's so important. Most of us don't set boundaries because we're too scared to set the consequence, because the consequence is the part that's actually going to make sure that people don't want to accept. All right. So
I just want to ask a question. You made a statement tonight, obviously when you now set a boundary with the person for the first time, emotions get involved.
Yeah.
But you made the statement, no one can make you angry. Just talk on that a bit.
Okay. So for example, let me go back to the example that I used where I was saying that Anthony needs to tell me I can't behave the way I'm behaving. Now, because I myself, all right, don't want to receive the consequence to the action, and how dare you pull me out of that. So my emotions, okay, I choose to get angry at Anthony for that situation. For example, we get angry because of things that trigger in us, and Anthony could trigger the emotion, but I choose to get angry. So he could have done exactly the same situation and had the same conversation with me, but if I was in control of my emotions, I would have said, gosh, okay, I accept what you're saying to me. I will try not to be that terrible person anymore, and there's no need for me to get angry. But because of our state that we're in, and because the person that for example, Anthony's sister, there was a time that we wanted to set a boundary with her, but her emotional state at that time, she was going through so much trauma in her life. For us to have set that boundary with her at that point in time and communicated like this, she would never have received it in love. She wasn't in the place. So please understand, there's some people that you just cannot set the boundary verbally to because of how they're going to react. And that's because of their emotions. It's because of them. So we need to understand that anger comes because it comes from fear, frustration, or hurt. So we're either fearful of something, so fearful of losing a relationship, so you would be angry. Hurt is because somebody physically hit you or emotionally caused you pain. You're going to get angry. So it's fear, frustration, and because you're so frustrated, you will get hurt. But it's all to do with the person. So Anthony could say something that will trigger fear, frustration, or hurt in me, and my reaction or my overreaction would be anger. It's if he never was that trigger or didn't say anything, I would never be angry. So therefore, we need to understand that he could say exactly the same thing to Tessa, and Tessa wouldn't flinch, okay, because it's not Tessa's issue. So when a person gets angry in front of you, you must understand, just process it and say, fear, frustration, or hurt. I never caused this person to be angry. They're angry because of fear, frustration, or hurt. Okay, and I did nothing. So I never caused the anger. They caused their own anger because they haven't dealt with the fear, the frustration, or the hurt. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think what we also do is let our minds go back to a situation where we did not set healthy boundaries on ourselves. I mean, I can tell you guys straight that there was a time in my life where I was actually doing counseling. And because I so badly wanted to help the people, I would allow them to abuse me. And when I see the time again, they've been there 2.5 hours, not even realizing that there were two kinds of boundary violation there. Number one, they were boundary violators, violating my time and consuming my time, but me being consumed in the victim status because I wanted to help them. Until I saw a DVD by Lee Ezell, E-Z-E-L-L.
Yeah, Lee Ezell.
Yeah, You Hold the Key. When I actually realized I was running around with, I've got your key, I've got your key, I've got your key. And I actually wanted to act as their savior. Man, when that hit me, that listen, you are not the Holy Spirit. You're not there to save them. I had to actually set boundaries on myself, not to allow people to put me in a situation of becoming the victim, and that purely because I wanted to help them. So a boundary's got two ways, not in the ugly way only. I mean, that was helping other people, that was changing their lives, but it was not healthy in terms of time management and also behavior management. And I had to really start changing the way that I conducted myself in these sessions. And I would obviously have an ABF, which is an absolute bloody final of how much longer I am prepared to assist. But I also had to set times. Otherwise, I would just kept on being in the state. And so therefore, the right reasons, you can actually suffer by setting boundaries. And I admit to you, whereas in other cases, I can be as tough as nails. I mean, you heard what my nickname was, Hitler. I mean, I did not allow people to even get close to me because I was living in a glass house. You could see me, but you couldn't get close to me. You'd bounce your nose against the wall because I was in that glass house protecting myself. So, guys, just be honest with yourself and ask yourself the question, where do I need to set better boundaries, A, or B, where am I allowing myself to be boundary violated? And that means you actually have become a victim. And then work towards a harmonious journey to wellness. Because remember, you try and you try again and you try again until you say, I got it right. But the big thing was how you do it.
How you do it is the most
How you
important.
do it is most important.
So the purpose of tonight's session was to share with you that most of us think that setting boundaries is just saying no to people. It's much more than that. And also to identify the areas which was those 10 areas that I gave you, of where a boundary, we might not be setting a boundary. So very important for us all to just have a look at it. And then the last part of the session was to make sure we knew how to set a boundary. So please, in love, in kindness, you be prepared, you process it first, okay? I'm so sorry you can't hear anything right now, but we're just wrapping up and you will get the recording. So awesome, guys. Anybody else want to say one thing, last thing, or you're all good? Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Just a question. You said that, and I'm thinking of someone that you said that if some people you can't set a verbal boundary.
Yes.
They will attack you. What do you do then?
I was waiting for someone to ask me that. Awesome. So what you do is you go back and start defining what is the boundary you need to set. what is being violated and what do you need to say and what do you need to set. So with the example, we understood that this person, every time we were visiting them, would have a personal attack on Anthony if we were there longer than 20 minutes. We then, because we had to work out how do we set this boundary, but there's no ways they would accept, no ways, okay? We then, after a few visits of verbal abuse and all kinds of abuse, we worked out what the time frame was. We then set a boundary ourselves. So when we arrived, we would say, you know what, thank you so much. It's so awesome to see you. Kissy, kissy, huggy, huggy, lovely. But you know what, Michelle has got a Zoom call, or she's got an appointment on a phone call in the next 15 minutes. We literally are going to grab a quick cup of coffee. We just thought and then I would take the blame that I was the most terrible person on planet Earth because I had to, and really, honestly, we would be up and gone in 15 minutes. We'd quickly drink the coffee and out the door and say, thank you, give big hugs and loves and kisses. And we just loved on today. And that we probably did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, today, the two of them have got the most amazing relationship because we know the time frame. Now, the time frame as that person grew, okay, and didn't abuse us anymore or abuse Anthony anymore, we then tested it. Now we can go 20 minutes, but we went into 20 minutes after about 10 years. All right, so you set a boundary, but they don't know the boundary is being set. Okay. And then when you're doing it, you do it in love and you do it in kindness and you do it in happiness and enjoy. Going back to the rat story, because they're going to also think, gee, that was such a nice visit that we just had. And then they look forward to the visit again. And then they look forward to the visit again. So you need to spend time in the defining what the boundary is, why you want to set it. Okay. And then you need to put it into practice, but then you need to be consistent with, as Fernando or Isabel said, it's about keeping that boundary. Okay, then you must stay consistent with it, because that way you're teaching them also how to live in a harmonious relationship with you. I hope that helps. Cool. All right, guys. Great. George, Tessa.
I just
Yes,
on a
George.
lighter note, I would like to know how Anthony got over the short man syndrome.
Oh, George, we're working on that one. Hey,
That is a big problem there.
He brought shoes with heels.
I started wearing a skirt with high heels. No, that's the only way I got rid of it.
Awesome. Love you guys. Simon and Mariki and Alda and Marina, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Tessa, Fernando, Isabel, George, Sonia, Vili. I know Michelle and Anton, the signal broke, but that's okay. We'll send them the recording. And Shalane, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. If you've got a topic that you would like me to expand on, send it to me. Okay, if you've got some ideas or a topic that you would like to see what my perspective is and how it's impacted my life, I'd love to know. All right. Thank you, guys.
I'll tell you next time why we had our fight. I'll keep it.
Because he didn't know how to accept no. Cheers, guys. Love you all. Bye.
Cheers.